Over the past few years, we have witnessed some of the greatest title reigns in WWE history. Bianca Belair ruled the women's division as champion for 419 days. Roman Reigns continues to be in God mode after smashing the 1000-day milestone as the undisputed Universal Champion. But none of them have embodied the word sports in sports entertainment quite like the Ring General Gunther has. And in many ways, he has become the prototype for what a dominant heel champion should be. With Gunther becoming the longest and perhaps the greatest Intercontinental Champion ever, let's take a look at his WWE career so far and see how he became the most feared man in WWE. While we all know him today in the big leagues as Gunther, he actually made a name in the independent scene first as Walter. Known for his technical mastery and for having the stiffest chops in the business, Walter would literally strike fear into the hearts of his opponents in every promotion he went to. By 2018, he has become one of the biggest indie stars, not just in Europe but the entire world, and it just so happens that WWE was also deep into their UK expansion plans with the launch of a fourth brand called NXT UK. It's no surprise then that they would aggressively pursue someone like Walter in order to get more eyes on the product. And so on November of 2018, several news outlets broke the story that Walter has officially signed with the WWE. And just 2 months later, at NXT UK's first ever takeover event in Blackpool, the Ring General would step foot in a WWE ring for the very first time in grand fashion by crashing Pete Dunne's post-match celebration after a grueling title defense against Joe Coffey. And with this intense stare down, Walter made his intentions crystal clear that he's coming after Dunne's United Kingdom Championship. However, before he can get his hands on the bruiserweight as a small taste of just what he's capable of, Walter destroyed Jack Stars in his first ever televised match in what was an utter show of dominance. In the weeks that followed, Walter continued to dominate the competition, even forming a short and unlikely alliance with his rival to beat Gallows before it all came to a head at NXT TakeOver New York, where Walter and Pete Dunne absolutely waged war for the NXT UK title. And while Dunne put up a great fight, in the end, Walter would get the victory, ending the Bruiserweight's near 2-year reign as champion. Nobody could have expected at the time that Walter's reign as NXT UK Champion would surpass even that of Dunne's, becoming the second longest title reign of the modern era, just behind that of one Roman Reigns. But now that Walter holds the top prize in NXT UK, the target on his back just grew exponentially, so he needed an insurance policy to make sure that he stays on top. And he got just that during his rematch with Pete Dunne for the NXT UK title. In the final moments of the match, two men by the name of Marcel Bartel and Fabian Eichner would come out to the ring and help Walter retain the title. These two men, who we know better today as Ludwig Kaiser and Giovanni Vinci, would form a unit with Walter known as Imperium. While today Imperium has become quite a popular faction in the WWE, what some may not know is that Walter and Bartel aren't exactly strangers to being in a stable together, as they were part of one during their time in the Indies in a group called Ring Camp. And so the landscape of NXT UK instantly changed with the forming of Imperium. As a unit, their core belief is simple:
this match is sacred!
And the only way they know they can instill this self-righteous ideology is by beating the ever-living shit out of their opponents. And they were pretty successful in doing so, as Imperium's time in NXT UK could be described in 2 words: utter dominance. The group mercilessly mowed down everyone in their path that not even the resistance of Pete Dunne, Tyler Bate, and Trent Seven as the British Strong Style were able to stop them. And Imperium would only get stronger as they added another member to their ranks in Alexander Wolf, who revealed himself to be the masked entity that aided Imperium in their win against British Strong Style. However, Imperium wasn't satisfied over this victory, no. They wanted to make an example out of them. And so weeks later, they would interrupt a title match involving Mustache Mountain and viciously attack Bate while they handcuffed his partner and made him watch in agony. Bate would be taken off TV for nearly a month to sell the beatdown, which led to Trent Seven seeking retribution for his fallen partner, challenging Walter to a one-on-one match. But again, Walter would show why he's a force to be reckoned with, as he brutalized Trent Seven with powerbomb after powerbomb until the referee had to stop the match. With all his rivals taken care of, Walter found himself questioning if there's even anyone left to challenge him. But as soon as he said this, an enraged Tyler Bate would make his return and take on Imperium by himself. And as their feud had seemingly reached a fever pitch, NXT UK GM Johnny Saint made the announcement that Bate would be the one to challenge Walter for his title at NXT TakeOver Cardiff. In the weeks leading up to their match, Bate would get the upper hand on Walter, with Imperium finally getting their comeuppance after all the havoc they've caused. And so fast forward to NXT TakeOver Cardiff, the two men clashed in what was arguably WWE's match of the year for 2019. Bate showed why he was pound for pound one of the strongest men in all of WWE, but even his Herculean efforts weren't enough to topple the Big Brute, and Walter remained the champion. With this emphatic victory, Walter had finally taken care of their Tyler Bate problem, and this pretty much turned Imperium into the unopposed kings of NXT UK. And so they looked to expand this influence to NXT UK's big brother, NXT. In true Imperium fashion, they would announce their arrival by crashing a random match. However, they were welcomed by none other than Kushida, a junior heavyweight legend in New Japan and one of the newest big name signings in NXT at the time. Kushida would embarrass Imperium upon their arrival and even hand them their very first loss a week later when he teamed up with Breezango in a 6-man tag match. The Ring General didn't take too kindly to this, kicking his head off by surprise after the match. And on the following week, Walter would beat Kushida one-on-one in a surprisingly competitive match that made Kushida look like $1,000,000 even in defeat. Fast forward a bit to November of 2019, WWE was gearing up for its annual Survivor Series pay-per-view, but this year was quite different as NXT was now included as the third brand for the very first time, making it the biggest brand warfare event in WWE history. With Triple H leading the charge, NXT would invade both Raw and SmackDown, and absolute chaos would ensue in the coming weeks. And since Imperium have recently been on NXT, they would also be involved in the festivities as during WWE's UK tour, they crashed SmackDown Live and delivered a mugging on heavy machinery before a scheduled match. Then, a week later on Raw, Walter answered Seth Rollins' open challenge, but unfortunately the dream match got cut short as the rest of Imperium attacked Seth, causing a DQ and a brawl would break down after. And so later that night, a match between all members of Imperium and the team of Seth Rollins, Kevin Owens, and the Street Profits battled it out, with Rollins and friends getting the better of Imperium. Come Survivor Series, Walter played a huge role as part of the traditional 5-on-5 elimination match, and by huge, I meant he was the very first man to get eliminated. Yeah. Following the events of Survivor Series, Imperium would go back to their domain at NXT UK, and this time a new challenger would step up to Walter in the form of Joe Coffey. At NXT TakeOver Blackpool 2, Walter defended his strap against Joe Coffey, and while they had a decent outing, the real story here was after the match. As Imperium stood tall in the ring after Walter's victory, the crowd would erupt when suddenly out of nowhere, the Undisputed Era came out and delivered the beatdown on Imperium to close out the show. Even though the attack was quite unprecedented, it actually made a lot of sense when you think about it. You see, while Imperium had established themselves to be the top faction in NXT UK, in the black and gold brand was the Undisputed Era who called the shots. Led by Adam Cole, the group had been running roughshod over NXT since 2017, and it was only a matter of time before these two dominant factions would collide in, well, Worlds Collide, in order to find out who really is the top faction in all of NXT. And at Worlds Collide, we found out exactly that when Imperium, even after being a man down early in the match, still managed to defeat the Undisputed Era in what turned out to be an instant classic. Walter then sought quite possibly his biggest challenge yet, as he drew the ire of one Finn Balor when he sent his men out to attack him during a promo on NXT. But why was Finn Balor back in NXT? Well, in 2019, Balor was in a huge career slump after being squashed by The Fiend and was in desperate need of a reset. So after taking a short hiatus, he agreed to move down to NXT temporarily, though it actually turned into a longer stint. There, he would go against the new guard of the black and yellow brand with the likes of Adam Cole, Keith Lee, Johnny Gargano, and supposedly Walter. Over the coming weeks, Balor shot several vignettes hyping up their title match that would have taken place at NXT TakeOver Dublin. But in a cruel twist of fate, the global pandemic would ultimately lead to plans getting scrapped, and to this day, Balor and Walter have not faced each other yet in a WWE ring. Not only that, NXT UK in its entirety was also forced to shut down for nearly 6 months until tapings resumed on September 17th of 2020, albeit in a closed-door setting. By this time, Walter had a new challenger in Ilya Dragunov, who actually won a battle royal earlier that year to earn a title opportunity. Tensions would rise during the contract signing between the champion and the challenger as Walter slapped the taste out of Dragunov, causing a huge fight to break down, giving us a teaser of what's to come. The two finally faced each other on the October 29th episode of NXT UK in a match that completely broke the entire internet wrestling community. 25 minutes of just pure, unadulterated brutality. Ilya took every punishment from Walter and gave it back tenfold. It was one of the very rare times a match got elevated by the lack of a live crowd, because you could just easily hear every spine-chilling stiff shots these men delivered to each other. And even though Ilya's spirit did not break, his body did, and he would pass out from Walter's chokehold. It was at this point that Walter had fully established himself as the Thanos of WWE, especially after he surpassed Pete Dunne's record of 685 days on February 19th of 2021. However, if there was one man who could put an end to Walter's domination, it would be NXT's resident locker room leader and the face of the brand at the time, Tommaso Ciampa, who himself has faced the toughest opponents NXT has to offer except for Walter. And so, the two would cross paths when Imperium ambushed Ciampa after his win over Marcel Bartel. Ciampa would then lay out the challenge to Walter for his NXT UK title, to which he answered by leaving a huge handprint in the Blackheart's chest. On day 1 of NXT Stand and Deliver, Walter defeated Tommaso Ciampa in a very physical back and forth match. But there was no rest for the weary, as only a day after, Walter had to go back to NXT UK and defend his title against another challenger in Rampage Brown. This mountain of a man had been building quite the resume since he came to NXT UK, and while pound for pound he did match Walter physically, the Ring General was just on a whole nother level of dominance. And he convincingly handled his opponent to regain the title for not one, but 2 straight days in a row. While Walter was busy taking care of business in singles competition, cracks would start to form within Imperium as Alexander Wolf was kicked out of the group for his quote-unquote incompetence. Although the real reason was that WWE just refused to renew Wolf's contract and he was released a day later. Things went from bad to worse as around the same time it was also revealed that Walter had suffered a severe hand injury which kept him out of action for a couple of weeks. This again forced Ilya Dragunov, who had been slowly working his way back up the cards, to have to wait a couple of months for his title rematch. The rematch would finally happen at NXT TakeOver 36 and it was just as great, if not better, than their previous outing, garnering another 5-star nod from old Dave Meltzer himself. However, the outcome would not be the same this time around, as Ilya Dragunov did the impossible and conquered the Ring General, handing him his first ever loss in singles competition for over 2 years. This win also marked the end of Walter's 870-day reign as champion, a feat that hasn't been achieved since 1988. With Walter's time as NXT champion coming to an end, so too did his tenure at NXT UK, and he officially joined his stablemates on the main NXT brand at the start of 2022. You see, unlike Walter, Barcel and Eichner had actually become a mainstay on NXT for the better part of 2021, even winning the NXT Tag Team Championships late that year. And now that their leader had made the jump, Imperium sought to conquer NXT just like how they did with NXT UK. But this version was way different from when they first arrived, as it had gone through a complete facelift, now being known as NXT 2.0. The brand had also shifted its focus more on building newer, more greener talent rather than going after indie stars. And things would not start the way Imperium had envisioned, as they lost their very first match in NXT 2.0 as a unit at New Year's Evil. In the weeks that followed, Imperium would find themselves feuding with another faction known as Diamond Mine, a group that was founded by Roderick Strong after the Undisputed Era fell apart. This all began when Diamond Mine's manager Malcolm Bivens ran his mouth on Imperium, which caught the attention of Walter. And as he was about to get the beaten out of him, Roddy would step up to Walter and the two would have a match on the following episode of NXT. However, the more interesting part is what happened after, as Walter just casually announced himself by the name of Gunther. This caused quite an uproar with the wrestling fans since Walter was already an established name. And to add more fuel to the fire, he was even initially supposed to be called Gunther Stark, which a quick Google search would tell you that it was the name of an old Nazi soldier, something you definitely don't want your product to be associated with. WWE eventually realized their mistake and the name got cut to just Gunther. But regardless of the name change, Gunther continued to dominate the competition, first by taking care of Diamond Mine in a 6-man tag match and then going on a winning streak in the weeks that followed. Although Gunther clearly showed why he deserves to be on top of NXT and get all the opportunities, it seemed like someone like LA Knight was the one being handed the title shots even though he was losing most of his matches. This angered the Ring General, who called out the megastar, and the two started a short feud with Gunther making quick work of Knight at NXT Stand and Deliver. Just 3 days later, in what will be Gunther's last match in NXT, he gave the rub to one of its fastest rising young talent in Braun Breaker, who successfully defended his NXT championship while also being the only man to pin Gunther clean in a one-on-one match. And so Gunther made his main roster debut in the very same week on SmackDown in a typical squash match scenario with Marcel Bartel, who was now called Ludwig Kaiser, by his side. But unlike LA Knight, who got completely repackaged when he moved up, Gunther's presentation pretty much stayed the same, albeit with one important missing piece, the third man of Imperium, Fabian Eichner. No one exactly knew why he got left out when Imperium got called up, but he was soon repackaged as a singles act, now going by the name Giovanni Vinci. But that's far from the end of Vinci's time with Imperium, as we'll find out later on. And just like in NXT UK and NXT, Gunther instantly made himself a feared entity entity in the SmackDown locker room, literally chopping down anyone who stood his way. It didn't take long for Gunther to get the attention of then Intercontinental Champion Ricochet, who had just recently won the gold from Sami Zayn and has been having sort of a career resurgence as of late. Unfortunately, that would all end abruptly when he was made to defend the title against Gunther on the June 10th episode of SmackDown. And while the match was a short one, clocking only at around 8 minutes, it wasn't really a squash since Ricochet had a great showing. But what it did do is put Gunther over in a huge way, as he had become the new Intercontinental Champion after being just called up 2 months prior. And immediately, Gunther would put in the work to restore the IC title's prestige as the working man's title with 2 back-to-back bangers. First with the title rematch against Ricochet, and then in a dream match scenario against Shinsuke Nakamura, which honestly should have been a bigger deal had they faced each other when Nakamura was still at the peak of his popularity. But perhaps his finest work yet came during his feud with Sheamus, as the Celtic Warrior became Gunther's next challenger for the IC title when he won a grueling fatal 5-way match. Gunther had probably found his perfect rival with Sheamus, as here was a guy who was known to hit just as hard as he can. And at Clash at the Castle, that was on full display as these two brutes, no pun intended, delivered the Match of the Year candidate in what can be perfectly described as big meaty men slapping meat. After a 20-minute war, Gunther stood tall, still the champion, and Sheamus, even though he lost, got his flowers from the crowd after a banger of a performance. The match itself wasn't the only highlight of the night though, as Giovanni Vinci also made a surprise appearance, officially reforming Imperium in the main roster. And on the SmackDown after, Imperium showed why they were the most dominant faction in NXT UK when they beat the Brawling Brutes in a 6-man tag team action. Coming off this white-hot encounter, Gunther and Sheamus looked to recreate magic once again in a rematch for the Intercontinental title. However, Gunther ruined Sheamus' hopes of ever becoming a Grand Slam champion as he defeated Sheamus once again, but this time in a bit of a questionable way. And so the rivalry between these two reached a boiling point at Extreme Rules when Imperium took on the Brawling Brutes in a good old-fashioned Donnybrook match, with the Brutes finally getting one over. In many ways, this feud gave Sheamus a new lease in his career that he'd been missing for quite a while now, and it also elevated Gunther's reign to the next level, a level which he would continue to raise in the coming months as he decimated every challenger from Rey Mysterio to Braun Strowman and Ricochet again, all while putting in the best match of the show. At Royal Rumble 2023, Gunther gave one of the greatest performances in Rumble history. Entering at number 1, he lasted all the way till the final 2, where he had an epic 8-minute battle with the returning Cody Rhodes. And though he got eliminated last, Gunther became the absolute star of the match. On the back of this stellar performance, Gunther would continue to rack up wins en route to WrestleMania 39, where he would face his greatest nightmare, a triple threat match scenario for his IC title. But how did he get to this situation? Well, weeks before Mania, Drew and Sheamus had accidentally both won a fatal 5-way match to determine Gunther's next opponent. This caused a bit of a falling out between the two, and the week after, Drew and Sheamus would battle it out one-on-one to find out once and for all who the real number 1 contender is. But things didn't go as planned as Imperium crashed the bout, resulting in a no contest, which then forced Adam Pearce to declare both Drew McIntyre and Sheamus as co-number 1 contenders. And so naturally, the Ring General was livid by this decision, as he has gone on record in the past about not liking triple threat matches. And now, not only is his title reign in more danger than ever, he didn't even want to be in this situation which he caused in the first place. Regardless, at WrestleMania 39, the trio put on an instant classic, with the match being as hard-hitting as advertised. But Gunther, by the skin of his teeth, still managed to get the win. With WrestleMania now in hindsight, Gunther looked to wrap his time up on SmackDown with the 2023 draft fast approaching. But before that, he would have one final title defense on the blue brand against an unlikely challenger in Xavier Woods, which he made light work of. Come draft night, several big roster moves happened, which included Gunther and the rest of Imperium moving to Monday nights. And they wasted no time in gunning after Raw's top dogs in the undisputed tag team champions in Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens, who at this point were still involved in a feud with the Bloodline. As Imperium surrounded the ring ready to pounce on Zayn and KO, they would get some much needed backup with Matt Riddle joining the commotion, causing a fight to break down. Later that night, Imperium suffered a major loss at the hands of the original Bro and the tag team champions, although that was only the beginning, as both sides would end up trading barbs and insults over the coming weeks. But as this was going on, Mustafa Ali would earn an opportunity to face Gunther for the Intercontinental title at Night of Champions, which in a way wasn't really surprising since the event was held in Saudi Arabia and Ali needed to be featured on the card for representation purposes. And though Ali never stood a chance against Gunther, he would put up a strong showing for the hometown crowd. After Night of Champions, Gunther turned his attention back to Zayn and KO, beating both in singles action but failed to capture the undisputed tag team titles with Ludwig Kaiser. But wait, why wasn't Vinci the one competing with Kaiser for the title match, you ask? You see, a week before, Matt Riddle took out Vinci's leg during a backstage altercation. This incited the Ring General, who vowed that Riddle would suffer the consequences for his actions. And And true to his word, Gunther would destroy Riddle's leg while at the same time accepting the original Bros challenge for the Intercontinental title at Money in the Bank. Now these two have already faced each other several times back in the indies, so their ensuing match was straight up fire, albeit a little bit too short for a premium live event. Though after the match, things would get even more interesting as Drew McIntyre made his return after not being seen since WrestleMania to send a message to Gunther in the form of a Claymore. And that message would be a challenge for the Intercontinental title, which Gunther happily obliged. But the Ring General might have bitten more than he can chew when he ambushed the Scottish Warrior after his match against Kaiser, only to pay for it with a power bump to the announce table instead. At SummerSlam, Gunther and Drew McIntyre face each other in a barn burner of a match. Not the best we've seen from either man, but still really damn good. And as Gunther inches ever closer to becoming the greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time, one man looks to spoil his plans in the very underrated Chad Gable, who might just be the guy to dethrone him once and for all. But as it stands, Gunther has now surpassed Honky Tonk Man as the longest reigning Intercontinental Champion ever, a legendary feat in itself. For decades, we've never seen someone have a perfect run in the WWE from the very beginning quite like Gunther has, and in some ways, his career can literally be compared to that of NBA legend Tim Duncan. What separates Gunther from other quote-unquote dominant champions like Roman Reigns is that unlike the tribal chief who has to resort to cheating all the time these days, Gunther has won almost all of his title matches clean, with Imperium not even needing to be at ringside. This presentation is why many would consider Gunther as the most dominant heel champion not just in WWE but in all of wrestling even. I have zero doubts that Gunther will be a world champion in WWE once he inevitably drops the IC title, but when that will be, we'll just have to wait and see. If you like this video, please consider subscribing as it would help the channel a lot. Till the next video, peace.